Good afternoon. I doubt any of the BT500 companies, the people who are running those companies, would be wondering who these three gentlemen are on the left of my, here on the left. Everybody who is anybody in the Indian corporate sector would be aware of who they are. To my left is Mr. Bajpai, who I know for Mr. Bajpai, about 3 decades now almost. Of course, Amit Tandon, and who's been a ratings expert and now runs his own, proxy advisory firm. And of course, the redoubtable Mr. N Gupta, who has been in SEBI as well. And running investigations where the biggest companies used to be fearful of him. As I said, these are people who know what corporate governance is, and what a privilege to have all three of them here on this panel. So I will start with you, Mr. Bajpai, of course, of the seniority and the experience which you carry. The first question to you, and then I will go to Mr. Gupta, because both of you are from the market regulator. From your time at SEBI and now, what are the key 2 or 3 changes you see in the corporate governance standards in India today in the top companies which you follow or you know about?
Thank you, Sourav. Since I have worked for SEBI, first there is a disclosure. According to my own definition, I'm a fossil. Because 5 years you become stale, next 5 years you become obsolete, and thereafter you become a fossil. You may ask me a question, then why am I here? There are some people whom you can't say no because they don't take no for an answer. Here is one, so don't bother about it. Now, SEBI has been focused on corporate governance significantly a long time. In fact, I had the honor and privilege of joining Security Exchange Board of India when the market was going through, I use the word called animated suspension because of a major market misconduct that had taken place. And there needed some kind of a wholesale reorientation of all market practices. And therein came the corporate governance. Before me, my predecessor had got Kumar Mangalam Birla Committee, which had brought about it. Then Narayan Murthy Committee was appointed, which brought in significant amount of improvement in disclosure, accounting standards, and the boardroom practices. Now, over a period of time, successive chairs and their teams have improved upon these, and eventually it has landed significantly on a very high standard on disclosures and accountability. Currently, if you have seen, and I would say the SEBI is probably ahead of the curve on other regulatory bodies, having got BRSR report, which is basically a corporate governance new framework, how the company should be evaluated. And in any case, as you are aware, the whole world is agog now. It's not only environment, but the social stability also. And also, corporate governance has itself turned to a different frame altogether.
Thank you, Mr. Bajpai. Mr. Gupta, you are now running a proxy advisory firm yourself, and you've been in SEBI. So what are the key changes? Because you keep a very close watch on corporate, listed companies.
See, Sourav, you have asked a very difficult question, that what are the key changes? So there have been thousands of changes that have happened in the last 20, 30 years. So the one change that you say that what is still yet to be done, is still to be effective, that change is implementation of everything, not in the letter, but in the spirit. So that is still a big vacuum. The second thing, as Mr. Bajpai said, that lot of changes have happened in the governance improved. So I would say that all the effectiveness that is coming, it is not coming only because of me and Amit. We are one small part of this ecosystem. The biggest change that happened was the new Companies Act, where e-voting was permitted, where participation by investors was facilitated. Earlier, the meetings used to happen in Timbuktu or Jumri Talaiya, and nobody participated. Now, with the e-voting, participation has increased. The second thing is this, taking cue from the Companies Act, SEBI came up with LODR, listing obligation, and that has impacted. Not only that, the impact of higher voting has happened in such a way that now the companies fear the risk of rejection. Now that fear is causing them to follow what me and Amit or other people say. You will not believe, when we started in 2012, if we needed a clarification and call to the company, who SES what, and they will shut the phone down on us. Now they call us before the report what you are writing. So that significant change has happened. And again I would say, repeat, the day the follow of the law is happening in the spirit, probably I would not be needed. Because then people will be following it, and what I need to do. It's like this, that we always say that we are like a pathological lab. We analyze something and give you a report. Now when you're so healthy, you don't need a pathology lab to give a report.
No, that's a very important point. Amit, I'll come to you from what Mr. Gupta said. The letter being followed, but not the spirit. Now, that's a very critical and a very fine line, right? Now, as proxy advisory firms and as somebody who knows the innards of companies because of your background also as a ratings person, how would you differentiate that, and what are the guardrails you think which shareholders, the minority shareholders who really depend on your protection in that sense, or rather your, flagging off the problems, how would you look at those?
So I'll kind of just supplement what Mr. Bajpai and Mr. Gupta said, and then I'll kind of go on to answer your question. So when we look at it, we kind of see the changes in three pillars. One of them, which both of them alluded to, was the change in regulations. They're a lot tighter. So if you look at the Companies Act, which Mr. Gupta spoke about, one of the ways is that you did have e-voting, but you also introduced majority of minority. Over a period of time, SEBI's come up with their LODR, tightened it. They had the listing agreement, which kind of gave way to LODR, so it's kind of a lot easier to bring in some regulatory changes. And that has been kind of done by way of what are special resolutions, what are ordinary resolutions. And they're important because both of them have a different threshold at which resolutions get approved. With the ordinary, it's 50%. With the special, it's a higher threshold, so you need 75%. And therefore, there are a constant set of changes. The Kota committee came in, which kind of had its own recommendations. Mr. Gupta and I were both members of it, and one of the focus areas was that, look, there are some gatekeepers, which are the auditors and the independent directors, and therefore they should have a greater role and responsibility. So I'd say at one level, it has been the regulations. The second is, what is important is in this whole period, the ownership pattern of companies has also changed. And that needs a bit of emphasis, because if you go back and you look at the market, I'm looking at it in terms of market cap rather than the absolute number. If you go back to just before the financial crisis, the Indian promoters held about 60% of the equity and the institutions held about 20%. So for every 3 shares which was held by the promoter, 1 share was held by an institutional investor. Today that ratio is 35% with the institutional shareholders, 50% with the promoters. And therefore, it's 1.5:1 or 1:1.5, depending on how you're measuring it. So that equation has changed. So the institutional shareholders have started sitting on the high table, so to speak.
And do you think, just to add to what you're saying, do you think institutional shareholders are also becoming much more involved?
Yes, they're much more involved. And I'll just come to that. But you know what that 35% means, and the size of the market, which was alluded to in the earlier session, is that you've got investors with deep pockets. So earlier, when we started, an investor held 1.5% equity. So the promoters would say we can ignore them. Now you've got people with 8.5%, 10% equity. So it's not so easy to ignore. So that has also become a large part. So the whole fact that the institutional framework has changed and they're much, much more involved now. So I remember when we started, you did not have e-voting. We went, I remember we'd gone with an investor to a shareholder meeting where every, it was show of hands. And all resolutions got defeated through show of hands. What happened next day, what was filed was that all resolutions got approved. There was nothing you could do. Now with e-voting, each vote is getting counted. Not just that, the institutional investors are much more, engaged. And that actually goes hand in hand with what is called stewardship. Stewardship is the fact that, institutions don't own, it's not their money, they're managing money for their unit holders or policy holders, and therefore they have a responsibility. And you find that that is also a part of the regulatory changes is that stewardship codes have been rolled out. So that has meant that investors are much more engaged. So when we started off, soon after we looked at it, 82% of the resolutions were abstained, 18% were voted. Now, 82% are voted, 18% shareholders are abstained. Coming back to what is it that institutional investors should look at, the opening comment I would say is that there's a general improvement all along. But what investors need to focus on is, who are the other investors? The more institutional investors you have, the better you would expect the governance quality to be. They also need to focus a little bit in terms of what the systems and processes are and what the company's communications are. Those which communicate more and better tend to be better governed because they have better grips with their of what is happening. And those who are poorly governed, don't communicate that much. And sorry, I know I've spoken for a long time, but I'll just walk everyone through a fairly interesting study which we've been doing pretty much since 2012. We look at companies and the timing of their AGMs. We find that those who have their AGMs in June June and July have better financial performance than those in August. Those in August have better performance than those in September. And if you're a loss-making company, you're more likely to have it in the last week of September than before. Back to you.
Those are very interesting insights. We'll come to that. Mr. Bajpai, you have been the regulator and then you have also been independent directors. You have sat on boards. Now tell me, the one thing we need to discuss at this forum also is the role of independent directors, including in the current scenario where a lot of, in that sense, problems or misdemeanors can be countered by the independent directors if they really become more firm. Do you think at this point that independent directors are really doing the fulfilling the responsibility they have been assigned?
Sir, you'll have to give me some space to be able to come back to really answer this question. We are asking for the role of independent director into a very narrow concept. First and foremost, I was one of those initial votaries of the fact that the firm is not owned by the shareholders alone. The Friedman doctrine, which was created in the great Milton Friedman, that a firm belongs to only shareholders and its responsibility is masters, only shareholder. That has subsequently been, as late as 2019, 183 CEOs of the US Roundtable have accepted that there are other stakeholders. Right. Now, this is the first part of it. The second part, which is very important to understand, is that firms are not a charitable organization or NGOs. They are a commercial entity. And if they are a commercial entity, their purpose or their impact of their functioning should be different. The third and most important aspect is, and then I'll come back to replying to your question. The third and most important aspect of the function is that in an efficient market hypothesis, where the resources are limited, they should be allocated to one who can create the wealth optimally. True. Now you put all these context into the frame of asking what independent directors do. Well, I'm afraid, even, and I'm sure you won't mind,
Please.
I like to criticize media on their face in this, in the presence of the...
We are used to it.
Okay.
Don't worry.
See, you have in fact been appreciating or understanding or criticizing the performance of a company from a narrow aspect, whether disclosures were adequate or not, whether accounting standards were followed or not, whether some minor, even without verification, some of the independent directors are consigned to media trial much before even anything is proved about it. But point I'm making is that first and foremost it has to be understood that independent directors represent more importantly the other stakeholders and than the shareholders alone. There are too many people to take care of the shareholders. Total shareholders return, there is so many analysts and so many people keep on doing. But what happens to other stakeholders? And that is where, and I can say that because I myself probably couldn't succeed, that the boardroom practices, what actually happens to the boardroom, hasn't significantly improved. It's not only a question of independent directors. Yeah, you are right. Independent directors have a role, but wherever I said, I felt I am an independent director not only for the minority shareholders, majority in any case take care of themselves, but also for the human resources, but also for the state, but also for the society, and but also for the customers.
So that is where media has been asking questions about these exact things, that how independent, first of all, are independent directors in many cases. So it is not that media has not asked. You have
asked, but then let me tell you what exactly I have been watching the boardroom issues are. There is a risk blindness. There is inadequate or you say inappropriate compensation. There is no accountability for any other stakeholders than the shareholders alone. And I would like you to kindly consider, and thirdly, which is more important, and right now it is being discussed everywhere, is the environment.
Yes.
Is the social stability. Now, these are the questions which have to be asked by independent directors on the board. But since the entire, now of course, as I said, SEBI has moved ahead of the curve by laying down the 6 principles, which are also, unfortunately, what happens, as Mr. Gupta was saying, yes, in filing the information, in trying to see that their performance on disclosure is better, accounting standards better, I would like to ask myself a question as an independent director. Why do I reckon only an accounting profit? What about the economic profit of the firm? If the resources of the society are limited, there has to be an accounting, both by the independent directors and non-independent directors, what happens to the economic profit of the company?
Mr. Gupta, taking off from the very important points Mr. Bajpai and you yourself also have made earlier, I want to ask you, in talking about the letter and the spirit which you raised, again, the role of independent directors may be, questioned on that count as well. How do you as a proxy advisory firm, and we will then come to the role of proxy advisory firms as well, how do proxy advisory firms like yours then view the role of independent directors? Are you really looking into each and every one of them, how independent they are, what are the kind of cross purposes they work at, and all of that, the entire gamut of issues?
So the problem with you is that you ask a question with 100 questions underlined there.
Because we are short on time, na?
Okay, so I will go one by one. The first is this: I feel that independent director is only for the purpose of appointment as an independent director. Once he is appointed as an independent director, he amalgamates in the entire board as one of the directors. Because if I carry in the boardroom that I am different from 3 other gentlemen in the room, I become a different class. The moment I become a different class, there is either going to be adversity or feeling of superiority or feeling of inferiority. So I would say the class of independent director should cease the moment I am on the board. That is for the purpose of appointment. Secondly, even when I am not an independent director, I should be putting my mind as an independent person for analyzing the resolution that are brought or the discussion should happen. Unfortunately, what has happened, it is seen that independence means opposition. The moment I have a contrary opinion that you, I am independent of you. That is a very dangerous thing to say. The problem that again happens, I as a proxy advisor, I have no view what happens in the board. I don't know who spoke what or who speak what, I don't know. So it is extremely difficult, or rather foolish of me to pinpoint a director that you have not performed or something like this. It is done. Having said that, what is our role is to say that what I as a shareholder in ordinary course would react when I see what is written in the notice or what is the agenda item. In the conference theme, you have written the 4 pillars of governance. I say there is no 4 pillars. There is only one pillar, that is fairness. Fairness encompasses everything that is there, the transparency and all the thing is the fairness. The issue is every director should examine the issue that is being discussed or proposed for the shareholder. Does it satisfy my fairness standard? Only one thing is to be remembered. If I was on other side, how I would take it? If I am satisfied that what you are throwing to me is a good food, I will take it. But if you are not ready to eat that food, you can't feed it to your guest.
True. Mr. Bajpai, I know you are passionate about ESG, and you mentioned this in the beginning also. Now, the SEBI has been trying to move towards, getting companies to comply more and more on the ESG front with BRSR and now BRSR Core. But recent studies have found only 27% of Indian companies are really, prepared for ESG. How do you view that? I mean, because now it is critical, as you said.
Well, Sourav, if you permit me 2 minutes, I want the assembly to know what exactly is the challenge now. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you all must be reading the twin revolution of industrial revolution and innovation of joint stock company with limited liability, common seal, perpetual succession, etc., enhanced and speeded up the economic development of the world. Millions of people, because of these two inventions, have been brought out of the poverty. But also, incidentally, because there was no checks, this had led to the annihilation of the environment and also social inequity. Now, and since you asked the question, let me link it once again, Sourav. You certainly have a reason to ask an independent director, what did you do? How did you perform? But first, please help us to change the context of that person's role itself. Right now, you are asking whether all disclosures have been done. He will say yes. All accounting standards have been followed. Yes. But we haven't really still defined who the stakeholders are and whether they are contractual stakeholders or the residual stakeholders. Because the residual stakeholder get from the residual. And then if he has to get something from the residual, how can you have only total shareholders fund? It will be stakeholders fund. So all I'm coming back is that environment has become very, very important. And let me give you some data. I'm sure all of you have been reading that we are already more than 1.5 centigrade above the industrial times. If nothing seriously is done, I don't seem to be. A lot of glib talk. I'm sure you have known what happened in Dubai today, the compromise that is reached. By end of this century, will be 3.5 centigrade above, and by middle of next century, 4.5. And this will lead to migration of 500 million people and just a simple loss of 5 trillion annually to the economy of the world. But if you take the loss of productivity, etc., 40 trillion is going to the loss. I am giving you this data because this must be brought to the focus by the media that the environment in the corporate governance is not just a fad. It's a very, very serious issue which has to be addressed immediately.
But companies aren't able to conform.
That's what I'm saying. Now comes the question. I mean, I'm sure you are aware, today's newspaper says that even HUL, I mean, not HUL, the original company has been accused, I'm using the word deliberately accused, still not confirmed, that they have been doing greenwashing. Because broad standards have not been developed. And which is what is important for all of us today is to get really serious with the scientists and develop the broad standards of how to become carbon neutral in each company. Level 1, level 2, I mean, I'm sure you are aware, they have already been definitioned by the scientists. Level 1 is what you pollute. Level 2 is what the services that you take. Level 3 is the one who buys your product and what kind of pollution he creates. Now, unless you have a reckoning for a company, I mean, right now, SEBI's regulations also talk of only level 1. And rightly so, because we don't have those standards available. So my suggestion to you and including to the regulators is, now let's get serious. Because the greatest polluters of the world are the firms. I mean, why Dubai, no compromise could be reached? Because all the petroleum companies were up against arms.
True. We are running out of time, Amit. The final word to you. What are the 2 or 3 things you would like now Indian listed companies to do? Of course, one of them clearly is the ESG front, which Mr. Bajpai referred to. What are the things you think is the unfinished agenda in terms of compliance on the governance front from somebody who's tracking these companies so carefully?
I think it's much more on the regulation side, and that's something which was alluded to, which is that companies don't actually seem to pay the consequences of not adhering to regulations. And that is the big thing. So if we look at it, we've got regulations for everything, and they're pretty comprehensive. It's something which Manisha referred to earlier. If you kind of look at Indian regulations, they kind of match with the best in the world. And in some instances, I would say globally, they're catching up with where our regulations are. How are we with regard to enforcement? It's not where we should be at this time. And the one consequence of that, and which people keep complaining about, is that, look, if you kind of then bring in another regulation because one is not being complied with. That's not the solution. The solution is pick up those who have not complied and have punitive damages so that there is much more adherence to that. So I would say that is the big unfinished agenda.
So the regulator must act tough, and there should be consequences for not adhering to it. Mr. Gupta, I have many more questions, unfortunately, but we have run out of time. But if you, yes,
give
please.
One word. See, my interaction with many people, whether it is the company, whether it is investors, say they have a concept that compliance is a cost. And this mindset had to change. How many of us say that medical insurance is a cost? Medical insurance is a necessity. Similarly, treat compliance as some sort of a medical insurance for well-being of the company. That is the final word.
On that note, I think it's been an absolutely fabulous discussion. We could go on and on. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yes, please.
Because there is an assembly of the representatives of people from BT500. May I request you, ladies and gentlemen, don't look at corporate governance hereafter from the narrow prism of only enhancing the shareholder value. Please look for corporate governance from environment protection, from social stability, and economic value add that you do out of the resources that you use.
Last word from the regulator, really well put. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and a warm round of applause for them.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Sourav, for that very insightful session. And we're all set with the next one. That's how it's going to be here at BT500 Wealth Creators Summit. The next session is aptly titled The Cult of Equity Investing. We'll actually be delving into the dynamic world of equity investing, exploring the shifts, strategies, and emerging trends that define the cult of equity investment. Our panelists for this